Okay, I'm back again. I'm looking a bit sort of mad, Professor. Uh, My hair, like my face, shave and then just wait until it becomes annoying. And the beard becomes annoying because it just starts to tingle and the hair just starts to look mad, Professor. And then just get the shave around again. Um, it may seem odd that I comment on my appearance all the time, but I religiously avoid mirrors. So this is basically the only time I get to see myself. Is it a sort of inverse vanity, or is it not? Is it actually just a different form of vanity avoiding mirrors because I've got in my head a picture of how I think I look, which is sort of 20 years out of date. And I don't like to look in the mirrors and be reminded that, in fact, it is 20 years out of date. Anyway, I'm here today to talk about publishing mechanics. Um, One particular stripe through publishing mechanics, which is the business of editing. And it will just be my normal ramble without any particular authority behind it. Um, I'm not really intending here to give you a whole toolkit to tell you how to do something. It's more of a sort of entertainment, like go inside the bottling factory and watch the conveyor belt with all the bottles on it and go, ooh, except less of the ooh. The it's not a deep dive. It's just a sort of top level. This is what's happened to me at least. So we'll go through the stages of editing a book and getting it into production in a traditionally published sense. So first step is obviously write your book, and there's a picture of me a very long time ago. The little boy I've got hold of there is now 29, so that gives you a picture of how long I've been doing this. They talk about this 10,000 hour thing, and I've definitely put in 10,000 hours. I'm writing fiction there, not a book, but I used to run this play by mail fantasy game, or part of it, and hundreds of players took part in a sort of shared fantasy world, and I wrote interactive stories with them along with a whole bunch of other GMs. And I kept doing it for about 10 years. So it was fiction writing, lots of practice of description and stringing together interesting sequence of events that keep people entertained. So there's a great number of ways to write a manuscript. I'm not going to say how you should do it. I'm just going to say that there are a great many varied approaches. The very first stages of editing are yourself just looking at the stuff you've written, either right away or at some later period, and just tightening things up or deciding you need to replace them wholesale. And depending on the sort of writer you are, you may have beta reader or beta readers. I think most writers use beta readers. I use one beta reader at a time typically, and it's been the same one for the last dozen or so books. So that's a huge service that she's provided to me, which I'm very grateful. The first book I ever wrote, no beta reader at all, and that was a very long time ago, and that was pretty rubbish. I mean, maybe not laughably bad, but in no ways good enough to be published. I wrote a second book, Blood of the Red. It's linked there, and that's on Wattpad if you want to read it. But it's decent, but it's not sort of a bestseller by any means, I don't think. And the third book I wrote was Prince of Thorns, which went on to do okay. And those last two, I wrote to an online critique group. So I'd write a chapter, put it on the group, and get feedback. And the feedback would be from like a dozen other people who were doing similar sorts of stuff, and I'd be critiquing their chapters as we went. That's a very useful way of editing a book. You sort of get beta reading en masse from people who know quite a lot about writing. And then when you're finished after your first draft, which is generally the way I finish, or after your 20th, some people write an enormous number of drafts, then that's the time to get into editing in a more serious way. So a traditional publisher you get your editing for free, in quotes. You'll get an in-house editor, and they will go through the various stages of editing, and you won't get charged. but you will, if you turn out to be successful, pay for it in terms of the cut from the sales of the books that they make. Self-publishers generally have to pay directly for editing services, so it's very tempting to scrimp on those and try and edit yourself. And obviously some people, the sums involved are huge for some people, and they just can't pay for editing. But if you can afford it, then you really should, because it's enormously hard to edit yourself. First of all, the editing skill set is not exactly the same as the writing skill set, so you won't have the skills to edit a piece unless you've done a lot of practice of editing. And second off, editing your own work is orders of magnitude harder, because you have to be able to divorce yourself from what you know about the story and look at the text in the sort of cold, independent light, and that's basically impossible. What you and I will end up doing is papering over the holes and the cracks in your story unconsciously, using what you know about the story, what you wanted it to say, and you will not be judging the story based on what is actually on the page in black and white, whereas an external editor will be doing that. So it makes it much more easy for them to edit your book than it is for you. Beta readers, they're good, but they're not, generally speaking, professional editors, and you want some editing. If you are a traditionally published author or on that path, then you'll have a literary agent, and sometimes they will act as a layer of editor too. So mine doesn't mind, just reads the books and basically says, yep, that's great, and pushes it on to the publisher. But some will basically edit the book first with the author and then send it on to the publisher for editing. So it just depends on their particular approach and on the needs of the author. So the next stages are the developmental edit, the copy edit, and then proofreading. And these are artificial distinctions, but it's how the industry operates, and they've basically been adopted everywhere. And one will bleed into the other, and there'll be all sorts of levels of overlap, but I will describe them as I've encountered them. Just a note here, I've picked on two editors that I know about. So there's one is Sarah Chorn, who seems to be in great demand, and it used to be a blogger for the SPFBO. And if you go to her website, which is linked to this piece is on my blog, she charges for 100,000 word book, that's typical length, $1,000 for a developmental edit, and $1,000 for a copy edit, and for proofreading 800. And if your book's twice as long, it'll cost you twice as much. These scale by word count. And my aforementioned beta reader, who's publishing under the name Mitchell Faywood, recently employed a lady called Vicky Brewster for a copy edit, and she seemed to do, in my view, a pretty good job of it. And if you look on Vicky's website, you'll see that she charges, translated into dollars, between $535 and $835 for a developmental edit, and the same for a copy edit on a 100,000 word book. The reason there's a range there is that, like almost all editors, Vicky will ask to see an example of the work that you're wanting her to edit, and she'll then make a judgment on how much effort it's going to take her to do. And if you need only light editing, I guess she'll go for the bottom of the range, and if you need heavy editing, she'll go for the top. But there will be a stage at which she'll say, no, thank you. There's going to be too much work here, and all editors will turn you away if your manuscript is too distant from the quality it needs to be in order to be published. There's no amount of editing that will make a book commercially successful if the writer is not at that point good enough basically at writing. Sometimes the answer is just that you need to go away, work on your craft, and then come back and either write a new book or rewrite the book that you were working on. So the developmental edit, stage 2, that's a high-level edit where the editor looks at how the story hangs together. They're going to be looking at things like pacing, whether our characters come across as real or consistent people, whether when they take actions there's sort of sufficient motivation for them, whether the plot is understandable and hangs together, whether the whole thing is basically explained, whether the book works on some grand scale. And this isn't like a review. They're not saying whether they like it, they're saying whether it works. So they're looking at it in a sort of emotion-free, technical sense at the mechanics of the storytelling. And the end product of that process is that they will highlight a whole bunch of weaknesses for you and then suggest, how you might improve those. Go away, work on it. And you have some back and forth over that, and it can be it's a bit more of a friendly process and suggested there. And my editor, who works with lots of authors, has a particular technique. I hope she uses it with all of us rather than just me, where understanding how personal a piece of writing can be to an author. She has this thing called a praise sandwich, that I call a praise sandwich, where she will, if she's going to complain about a section, she'll find something nice to say about something before that and something nice to say about something after that, so that the medicine is helped down with a little bit of sugar. And the amount of work that's involved in this developmental edit is going to be, well, it should be highly dependent on the nature of the book. If you are employing a freelance editor, then for a fixed sum, they're going to try and do a fixed amount of work. But an in-house editor with a publishing house, the amount of work they're going to do is going to depend on how much work they think needs doing and how much faith they have that the efforts they're putting in will be recompensed by sales of the book. And I read somewhere, or I remember reading somewhere, I might be wrong about this, that Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind, he and the editor worked on that together for quite a long time, changing things around, mixing stuff up. And obviously that effort, which is probably far greater than you would get from a freelance editor, unless you sort of came to an arrangement with them where they did a much longer involvement, that effort paid off, and the editor and that publishing house were repaid many times by the sales of that book. But it is for a traditional publisher, it's a gamble. It's money invested that they then hope to see back again. But if, on the other hand, a book doesn't need much editing, then the in-house publisher is quite happy to say, oh, that's fine, and let it through. I mean, I never say that's fine and let it through, but they will put in amount of work commensurate with the amount it needs doing to it. And the majority of the books I've written have gone through with very little editing. I think the Prince of Thorns, for example, the draft that I handed in, probably 95% of what's in there is now on the pages on the book on a shelf. And that's good, because you don't want to have things changed for just for the change's sake. And I guess that's the only caution with a freelance editor, where if you give them no, it's never going to happen, but if you gave them a perfect manuscript, what are they going to do? You've given them $1,000 and a perfect manuscript, and they can either say nothing needs doing, have your money back, or they can say I went through it all, putting in effort, and nothing needs doing, $1,000, thanks. Or they can just move the furniture around and make a bunch of changes just to earn their crust, which it's a bit of a dilemma. In terms of my own work, as I say, most of it is edited very lightly, but the most recent book I've written, which is The Book That Wouldn't Burn, that's been by far my most heavily edited book to date. And that doesn't mean that it was in any way bad. It's actually really proud of it, and the publishing company are very excited about the end product. Like The Name of the Wind needed a lot of editing, but I just pointed out that some books need editing and some don't. So in the process of writing it, I actually rewrote some sizable chunks of it off my own back, based on reading it myself and thinking, does this work? And based on words from my agent and from my beta reader. And then in the developmental edit, at my editor's suggestion, I went away and looked at different things and ended up deleting about 15,000 words. And I basically never delete anything. So that was very unusual for me. And then I sort of rearranged a whole bunch of other areas and whatnot. So probably only about 70–75% of the thing I handed in initially is unchanged on the page, unchanged at the top level. And I think that's an example of the system working. When a book needs very little done to it, it goes through with very little done to it, and when it needs a lot done to it, it gets a lot done to it. That's the process. My developmental editor, Jane Johnson at Voyager, also does a lot of catching grammar problems and rewording various lines. So a lot of the stuff that a copy editor does, and we'll talk about that down there, she just picks up as she goes along, because when you see something wrong, you fix it. And she has all the skills of the copy editor as well. But that's not the job of her first edit. That's just something incidental. She won't be aiming to get everything, just anything that's sort of glaring. So the top level things are addressed in the developmental edit, and then the author's sent away to fix them. Copy edit's much duller, much less interesting discussion about how the story structure, or none at all. In fact, it's all on a very small scale, where we're talking about grammar fixes, and where you've got your commas and whether the speech marks are in the right place and all of that nonsense. Not nonsense, important stuff, but all of that. And there's a little bit on sort of word ordering on a line-by-line version at the stage. Did you really want to use this word, or wouldn't this word be better? Let's use the word whom. And I say, no, thank you. And one of the other things that they do, which has on a larger scale, is consistency. They will look for consistency issues across the book. So, if on page 10 you said the character leaves the hall by the doors, and then 100 pages later they come back in through the door, the copy editor is going to be on your case saying, does it have double doors? Does it have a single door? Sort this out. And the same sort of deal for like the color of a character's eyes, or if they sit down and then sit down again, all of that sort of stuff. And it's all important because you are creating an illusion for your reader. And if there are errors like that and the reader happens to notice them, it yanks them out of that illusion. It says, hey, this is all made up, and it just spoils everything. So you want the reader just to sort of not be distracted by any sort of errors of that sort. And finally, you have the proofread, which is really the nitty gritty. It's just going through it. You're not going to correct anything at this stage apart from glaring typos, the use of the wrong word, typesetting errors. Like there's going to be a space, extra blank line somewhere, or the chapter ends in a strange place, or some all of those sort of typesetting, typos type stuff, which is a very skillful job. You need to have sort of the eagle eye. You need to have the concentration powers to go through an enormously long book, not be distracted by the story, but to just keep on looking for, is there a full stop at the end of every line? Have you used the right form of to, or all of that sort of stuff? And when the proofreading is done, that's it. So when I get sent my document, and they say this is now going to the proofreader, they give me the option to proofread it as well. And I don't have the talents to proofread it, but I always do, just because it's really the last chance I get to touch this manuscript to make any difference. And if I were to spot a typo, fine, I'll fix that. But also, if I were to spot some sort of huge glaring error, I could make some sort of impassioned plea to the publishers, please let me change this one paragraph because it's nonsense. So I always give it a read through at the proofreading stage. And I say there at the bottom that I feel I could probably step in for a developmental editor at this stage in my career, having done it so often with another editor and having written the books and all of that, that I have the talents required for that. But I couldn't do the copy editing. My grammar's decent, but it's not strong enough to fix all of the things and be perfect, completely sure that I got it all right. And also I lack the meticulous nature and frankly the interest to do that sort of thing well, even for myself, but certainly not for someone else. And proofreading's right out, really. I mean, I'll step in and try and help a friend out with proofreading, but it's her real pain. It's not in my nature to do that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's that. I'm going to step in with another one of these at some point and talk about some other aspects of the publishing process, maybe about pay and how much money you can expect and what an advance is and all that stuff, but we'll save that for another day. So I'm going to hunt the button and hope that everything recorded. And there's the button, so I'll say bye.